I'm kind of excited. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Worldhoppers for today's video. This is kind of an impromptu discussion that was prompted by some things that have occurred recently involving the Throne of Glass special editions that were being put out by FAIRYLOOT. So if you are unfamiliar with all what's been transpiring, we figured we'd talk about the situation first so that you're in the loop. And then we'll dive into various topics within this whole thing. So the rundown, I'll try to be brief, is that FAIRYLOOT announced a while back they were going to have a special edition set for Throne of Glass. And from then, they had two things on Instagram. One was images of the first 4 books, their covers, as well as what the entire set will look like on the end, like the pages themselves, because when you put the series together, you'll see artwork on the sprayed edges. So that was one of their posts. And then they had another post that had what some of the end page art would look like. And those two artists are two different people. And then they kind of came under some scrutiny because the artwork that was going to be on the pages looked similar to artwork that another company had done for this series also on the pages. And this other company, I think, is a little less known than FAIRYLOOT. So some people were kind of side-eyeing that, wondering, hey, why do these look similar? And we will show the images so that you can see. And then from there was also criticisms that some of the elements within the page art were not book accurate. And then with that other post that involved a different artist that was just character art that would go on the end pages, a lot of people were just not happy with that art. They didn't fit their personal taste, and it kind of turned into this perfect storm of anger and fandom, and involving some people that probably shouldn't have been involved in the conversation. So that's the brief rundown. Roger and Ingrid, did I miss anything for that brief rundown? No? Okay. Nope. I just wanted to check. So we've had some individual chats about this privately, and we figured we kind of come to Worldhoppers because that's what this is collaborative discussion videos. Before we get into our thoughts and getting into the specific parts of this, I wanted to talk about the level of fandom that all of us are, what we consider ourselves to be within Sarah J. Maas's fandom. So Ingrid, where would you say you are in it?
I'm a pretty big fan. For sure.
And of this series?
Both of them. I've read the entire series, and I like both of the series. And I think the only thing I haven't read from her is her Catwoman retelling. I think she has one, but that's the only thing.
And you also like the new urban fantasy series, right?
Yeah, I liked the first book, okay. Second book was terrible, and then we just read, me and Roger actually, Buddy read the last book in the series, and it was really good. So it kind of redeemed the series for me.
And Roger, how would you say you fit within the
I mean, I'd say I'm a light fan because I really like Throne of Glass.
A light fan.
ACOTAR is not as good for me. Like the first 2 books in ACOTAR were the best. The next 3 were not my thing. And then Crescent City, I had the same experience as Ingrid. I quite liked book 1 because I really like urban fantasy. But then book 2 was, the way that she does romance is not to my taste. And then book 3, since it focused less on the romance, it was much more plot. We were all here for it. So I'm like light fan. Heavy fan is down there, and then light fan, and then anti-fan.
I'm not an anti-fan. I feel like I'm kind of neutral in that I'm definitely not on the hype train. I wouldn't say I'm in the fandom at all, but I wouldn't categorize myself as anti-fandom in that I have never picked up one of her books and hated it. I have read some of Throne of Glass. I actually think maybe, I'm trying to remember if I've read 4 or 5 of them. I never finished the series. I never disliked it, but I also was not finding myself that engaged with what was happening. So I'm like, this might just not be for me. But I do appreciate there being this epic fantasy within young adult because I think that's pretty rare. I DNF'd A Court of Mist and Fury. I just was annoyed most of the time. But I also do think that she sort of started our modern romantasy trends that we see so much of, whether we like them or dislike them. I think that she was sort of the branching off point for a lot of what we see now. And then I have no interest in the urban fantasy series, not because I don't like urban fantasy, but because of everything I've seen of it. I'm not that interested. And I just haven't loved any of her works previously. And I think it's not like this is breaking new ground and feels like a totally different author. So I'm like, oh, I don't know that that's for me. And there's just so many other things to read. So I don't want to hate read them or read them just for attention or anything like that. But I certainly don't hate anything I've picked up.
Well, because you'd have to be really committed for the urban fantasy series these days, because now it's like where her series tie together. So now it's like, if you wanted to read Lost Metal or something by Brandon Sanderson, there's a lot of other things that you should probably read first for it to have full impact. It's the same way with books 2 and 3 in her new series.
Yeah, for sure.
Speaking of, since you mentioned the Lost Metal, that actually is a perfect segue into talking about this, because I wanted to start by showing the side-by-sides, the similarities, which I think did I spell that wrong? Anyway, the similarities between the pages, the sprayed edges of the books. And the reason I said this is a perfect transition is because I actually have some Sanderson books and imagery from Sanderson's Cosmere pulled up as part of this discussion. So we'll talk about that in a second here. But I do want for people to have context to present the images so that everybody can see. So let me share really quick this screen of the one that came out first. This is from the company Acrylopix. Check them out if you like these sprayed edges. But this is not FAIRYLOOT's version. This is a different version. And you can see that there's the stag, because that's a pretty significant, you both have read the whole series, so you know in Throne of Glass, the stag is a significant part of things. There's that, what looks like a castle in the background, and then the mountains. And this is an area, right? I don't know how to pronounce it, but is it pronounced Terracin?
Close enough. Terrazin, whatever.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's this particular area.
I thought it was Terracin.
It does matter, Roger. Ingrid's gonna.
I don't know.
I
thought
she's the top fan. So
I like long A's. I feel like they sound fancier to me, so my brain always diverts to long A's rather than short. Because Terrazin makes it sound
like fancier.
I like Terrazin. Like it makes it sound more like posh, which in my brain is just fancier.
Okay. All right. Never mind. Back to what Elle was saying.
No, it's okay. I mean, I don't know, and I think other people. I mean, this part of this whole situation is rooted in accuracy. So maybe
I mean, you're probably
maybe
saying it phonetically, right? Because it's Terrascen or something.
Yeah.
Let's see, and then here's. I want to make sure I get the right one pulled up. Here is FAIRYLOOT's version. So if you can look on the screen, you can see once again there's the stag, the mountains in the back. So I wanted for us to give our initial thoughts about the similarities, the differences, and the big uproar is that people felt like this was copied and that it was FAIRYLOOT trying to basically steal the artwork of this other individual and put it on theirs. So that's a pretty heavy accusation to make. Roger, you said when you first saw them, because you had seen the Acrylopix one, that was the first thing that popped up, right?
I mean, it's like the two main sets that I've ever seen of Throne of Glass. And so it is a pretty big coincidence that they both decide to depict the same scene almost. Because there's a lot of quote unquote iconic scenes in Throne of Glass that they could have done instead. They could have actually done the glass castle from the beginning of the series. They could have done other things besides this particular imagery. So it literally was the first thing. The second I saw it, I was like, oh, it's like literally the same content. There's like eagle, there's the dragons, there's the castle, there's the stag, there's the mountains in the back. It's like literally almost the exact same scene.
Yeah.
So it's hard not to be like, yes, it's the same scene. Like, I don't know what to tell you, but
right.
As far as
you
copying
said,
goes, like, not really. It's like,
well, I'm so sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, you're fine.
I was just going to say, to your point and highlighting that while there are other special editions of this series, to my knowledge, Acrylopix was the only one that had the sprayed edges like what we see nowadays where you put the books together. Because Juniper Books has the sleeves that create an image, but not the edges. So for you, that's the only other reference point you have for sprayed edges, combined imagery.
For
So
Throne
then
of
to see the
Glass,
fairy one. Yeah, for Throne of Glass. Ingrid, did you know about the other one before?
No,
No.
I had no idea before this whole thing happened. Yeah.
And what's kind of nice is I think is meant that you and I both, and probably a lot of people, got introduced to acrylics because of this whole situation.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Did you, when you did see the other image, did you think they looked a lot alike, or was the differences in colors? And because this one's a lot closer also.
Yeah, I mean, I can see what people are saying, right? It's the same scene in the books, like depicted, but I don't think that they're like very similar at all. Like it's the same scene, so it's gonna have similar elements, but in terms of, I'm not an artist, but in terms of like the way that the art is done, like this one is a lot more muted, and the art is completely, in my opinion, different than the other one. The other one's very like colorful, and I
Yeah.
just thought it was different. I mean, it's a scene in the book, right? It's Terrasen, it's where Selena is from, and so I get why they picked this scene to depict, because it makes sense with the book, but I don't think that they're that. I don't know. I don't think that they copied it, is my point.
Right. The color choice is different. The style is different. The scene
Mhm.
is maybe similar. So just to, because I think when you look at something in isolation, just, you know, thinking this situation, Throne of Glass, yeah, they look similar because it's the same thing. This kind of stuff happens when you're depicting artwork from, or when you're creating art for a series. So I did want to share really quick some Cosmere. If you type in Stormlight Archive Urithiru, this is the imagery that comes up, and you can see they all are going to look pretty much the same. So if you wanted to ask an artist, create Urithiru, it's this tower, and you gave them details, then they're probably going to create something that looks similar to what another artist is going to create, because it's the same, what you said, Ingrid, it's the same scene, it's the same area that's being depicted here. And so I'll scroll down too so people can see like this art here, and then if you go up to this one here, this is actually on a alternate dust jacket set, and it's reversed. So if you were to see that one side by side with the other ones, this one or this one, you'd have them on the same side. The tower would be on the same side. So it would look, I think that it would result in it looking similar. And we'll get to more of this in a second. But I wanted to show one more example of there being a series that's really well known, and there being some things that you might see that are similar. So Creedic Shaw, because this is a little bit closer, I think, to what we're talking about with Throne of Glass. Creedic Shaw is a particular area that this antagonist dwells within. And you can see artwork for this all kind of looks the same, which is, you could say it's a compliment to the author that it's created imagery that is similar in people's minds. Because in this instance, do you both think that for both examples of Urithiru and then Creedic Shaw that it creates artwork that looks pretty similar?
For sure,
yeah. Which isn't to say that there shouldn't be questions that come up as a result of the FAIRYLOOT edition looking kind of similar. But I think this is where we disagree with some of the comments that we saw, which some of the comments were immediately making accusations that the artist themselves copied the other artist. And for anybody that's had artwork commissioned, usually the person that is paying the artist gives them what they want. They tell them the details, the scene, the color choice. They will send that to the artist, and the artist works on that. So it is, I think, kind of unfair to immediately launch with certainty these accusations at the artist that she copied the other artist. And I think all three of us sort of agree that it's not fair to the artist to do that. Yeah. And yeah. I think that's where the three of us are like really confused about what was happening. Is the artist was kind of blasted and treated really poorly as a result of this.
People were so mad because they were like, pick an artist that's read the books. I was like, I don't know how realistic that is. Sometimes you just hire an artist that you like their style. Because I remember, like, you recently were going through it with the cover of your second book. Like, you pick an artist that you like their style, and they're not necessarily going to read your book to do the cover art. They're just going to make what you want them to make.
Right.
Yeah. There was also a whole thing where people were leaving mean comments because of the stag, like the color of the stag. He's supposedly white in the books, and then they were just slamming the artist for it being like the color of like a realistic stag or whatever. And so I also think that that's not just on the artist. Like whoever approved of that at FAIRYLOOT should have been like, this is supposed to be white, you know? Which is something
especially
they can
Sarah
change
J. Maas's
really
team.
easily.
Because like if anybody should have read her books, it's maybe the people that work for her who are okaying this kind of thing. Maybe should like.
Yeah, this was
and I don't think that. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, you're fine. I was gonna say this is the next portion that I wanted to get into. So the artist was not only being accused, like we were just discussing, of copying, but then everybody was not, I shouldn't say everybody because that's not true, but a lot of people,
majority of comments.
were addressing the fact that they didn't feel the artwork was book accurate. And again, that's fair. I think it's fair to ask FAIRYLOOT, hey, did you know that there's another artist who did edges that look kind of like this, and they look maybe too similar? Maybe you should consider changing the art. Second, I think it's fair to point out to FAIRYLOOT, hey, this stag is white. There's significance with the color. I think that's all fair to point out because if there's a chance that it can be corrected before the final product, because these are mock-ups, then great, because then you'll have book accurate art. But to Roger's point, it didn't just go through FAIRYLOOT's team. It went through Sarah J. Maas's team. They had to approve what was being done because it's officially licensed. So her team approved this. They also approved, I'm pretty sure, the Acrylopix one because Acrylopix is book accurate, or excuse me, book accurate. It's licensed. So it's kind of ironic that Sarah J. Maas's team, I guess, just gave the check mark of like, yep, it's fine. Yep, it's fine to both of these. And that so many people are mad and her own team doesn't seem to care. So I do think it's fair to ask and point out things to FAIRYLOOT. What I think is completely out of line is to drag the artist into it for doing their job. That's pretty much all the artist did, was she did her job. She was hired to do this artwork. She did the artwork. She created the imagery. And if they didn't catch that the stag wasn't white, that's not her fault. I don't know why people like, because she is excited to share, I got to work on this big project. That doesn't mean that you should go to her page and start talking about all this stuff to her directly. I don't know why people thought to rope the artists into it. It doesn't make any sense. But
well, plus it was probably an intentional choice on the artist's point, because like there's not a whole lot of contrast in the FAIRYLOOT edges to begin with. So I don't know that white would look good in that color scheme. So it might have been more like a choice because of the colors that she was asked to use. It might not even have been like, I just really like brown stags. It might have just been like something that like from an artistic composition standpoint.
I also think that, I don't know, I'm not sure if you guys checked. I didn't check her page, the artist page, but I did see that in the FAIRYLOOT post, both of the artists were tagged. And so they could see all of the comments. Right. Yes. So like you're tagged in it, you can see everything that's being said in the comments.
Yeah, depending on how you have it set up, you're probably getting notifications about what the 5,000 overwhelmingly.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I think it went beyond just wondering, because again, if you want to ask FAIRYLOOT, hey, why isn't the stag white? You know, those questions, fine. There were people that were justifying what some people attacked the artists. That's not up for debate. Some people didn't. Some people nicely asked. Some people were getting clarifications. Some people attacked the artists. And some of them justified it because they just feel like they should get the artwork that they want and the style that they like with imagery that they desire. And
Mhm.
the artist did reply initially, because at first, it got announced, and then all of a sudden there was this flood of comments. And so they were just kind of asking, like, I'll talk to FAIRYLOOT about it. It was so easy to see very quickly. I'll talk to FAIRYLOOT about it. I'll see if I can make these changes. This is just the color choice we went with, and, please be kind. And then people were mocking the artist for saying that. And there was one comment that was going on about all the things that they felt were wrong, and then they're like, and I'm being kind, by the way. And I'm like, no, you're mocking them. That's not being kind. Do we all need a lesson in politeness? Plus, other people then got upset when people were saying stop harassing the artist, because they were upset that the use of the word harass. And even if you worded it relatively politely, when there are thousands of comments and you add to it after the person has already replied, they already have answers. What new thing? You're not saying anything new, so it is harassment. When you have not just, it doesn't matter, it doesn't need to even be thousands. When you have 50 people coming to you, one should be enough. A couple questions asking for clarification, okay. But that many over the person who just did their job as they were hired to do it. It's just.
And I don't think they were, the thing is that so then after we talked about this in the group, I went to look at the comments, and it's not that they were kindly saying things, right? They weren't kindly being like, oh yeah, I don't love this, but I won't get it, whatever. People were upset, like genuinely upset, like, oh, we've waited years for this and this is what we get. And I'm like, that's not up for you to decide, right? Like this is a whole company like deciding on what to provide. And if you genuinely don't like it, don't buy it. Like,
yeah, it's the simplest solution.
It really is. The fact that they took the time out of their day to go on under FAIRYLOOT comments and be that rude and mean is just, I don't know. I don't get it.
Plus, just to the point that we were just talking about with book accurate art, I don't know how much I care about every exact detail being exactly the way it was described in a book. It's somebody's interpretation, just like when you watch an adaptation, like things change based on the medium. So like the brown side could have just been an artistic choice for the colors,
right?
And like, who cares?
Well,
like, it's not that deep.
I could be wrong. I'm kind of curious to look back at my sprayed edges now on other editions I have. I wonder how easy it is for white to come out well, or if it ends up looking kind of gray because of.
Well, that's why I think it probably only worked on the Acrylics one, because everything else was like Lisa Frank, really bold, vibrant, and then having the white is contrast. Whereas
and the white
versus
is much
kind of
smaller.
Green. Yeah.
The white, because the stag is much smaller on the Acrylics one than the FAIRYLOOT. It's pretty front and center.
Yeah, because the only way you could really get it is maybe if you had really white pages and just not having color there at all, and kind of using the natural page color as white. But like, people are just like, who cares about it being? I'm somebody who doesn't visualize particularly much when I'm reading anyway, so I don't remember hair color or eye color unless it's like really like repetitively shoved in my face. And like the stag is important, but I don't remember it being mentioned like 50,000 times to the point where I'm like, oh yeah, of course it was white. Like, I'm like, okay, sure, maybe.
Yeah, I wanted to share. I wouldn't remember.
I wanted to share really quick also as far as book accurate, and this is one that I feel like it's really actually quite important to the story, and I don't think pretty much anybody cares, which is for Second Era Mistborn. This is the cover of one of them, and the character in the back who is holding a gun, that character does not hold guns. They don't touch them. They don't mess with them. There's a whole thing tied to their backstory as to why it's really significant to their character, and I don't think I have seen any major uproar about this ever. Roger, have you ever seen anybody? Did you even realize that this was?
I didn't even notice the gun.
Yeah, it's a huge deal. And I've always laughed at it because it's not just the English version. It's also, I think the Polish editions have this character holding a gun. And you're like, the other character, yeah, but the character in the back, really no. And it's kind of bizarre that this is a huge thing. And for it to have this be inaccurate. Now, I do think it's important that obviously for a long time, no matter how a character was described in a book, you would see the characters on the covers just look kind of, we'll say major portion of the population American. Sometimes you're like, that's not what the character was described looking like at all. And that's very different. That's a very different situation because that's kind of just erasing the character's features. Yeah, that's a different situation. But just the shade of the stag, while you can be like, oh man, that's not right. You might politely tell them like, oh, are you going to change it? Do you think maybe you could fix this? That's fine. But the artist, like, I can't imagine seeing that cover for Second Era Mistborn, finding that cover artist and then laying into them. It's so beyond my like level of comprehension. I would never think to do that.
Which is like it's also so common these days that like covers are not completely book accurate. Because I remember even because I've talked to David Dalglish, the author of the Vagrant Gods trilogy, and he even mentioned that like the book 1, the mask on that cover is not how it's described in the book, and he knows it, but he thinks that the art is really striking and looks really good and is maybe even better than he visualized it in his head, and so he okayed it for the art for the cover, even though it's not technically like exactly how it was described in the book. Like sometimes you just let the artists have their artistic freedom. I don't like why is that so why is that like a sin against the entire Sarah J. Maas community that they've all been personally affronted? How dare somebody?
And I just think it went from that, right? From people pointing out about the stag, which whatever. Like I feel like that's nitpicky, but it might matter to other people. But it went from that to now let's attack the author, the artist, because we don't like this rendition, right? I saw a lot of people just being like, this is awful, it's ugly.
Well, that wasn't so much for the edges. That was people to Morgana who was doing the reverse dust jacket art and the characters on the end papers. They literally were like going into her comments being like, your art is so hideous.
People were also upset about the cover art, which the first artist did. They're like, I hate these covers. They're bland. And I saw them and I'm like, I kind of wish I liked this series because I think these look really pretty.
No, honestly, I love everything. I loved, like, compared, not saying anything against any of the artists, but comparing the two, I prefer the one that FairyLoot just put out. I prefer the color schemes. Just, I don't know, I just like it better. I feel like it fits the tone of the series much better. Instead of these like bright colors and purple everything, I feel like this one fits the tone of the series much better.
Well,
but it's
personal
great
preference. That there's both these options for people.
Right.
And
exactly
that, because I think it's fine. If you don't like it, don't buy it. Going back to that statement before, if you don't like it, you'd be like, oh man, I was really excited, but I don't really like this. But second, there's a part of me that's like, people are starving. Why are we all like up in arms about these covers? And I get that we're making a whole video discussing it. So there's that. But also the AdSense goes to charity. But also this is like kind of, this is a channel about book things. I get that we complain about dumb stuff all the time. We're like, permanent stickers. The books, the titles don't align on the spines. We complain about that kind of stuff, but we don't attack people. And that's why it's like you can be annoyed at the publisher, and if the artist had done something horrendous and evil, I would get being like, why are you working with them or something. But just the stag being brown tan instead of white, I'm just like, oh lord, how are we ever going to go on with our days? It's so I'm sorry. I before we started, I was saying, I'm like, maybe we'll like chill and not be too
tone it down a little bit.
Now I'm just like the entitlement of all these people. But yeah, I was like, I just wanted to tell people there's I always think back to that Kardashians clip of like, Kim, people are dying or whatever the one says to Kim, where that's what I think. Like, you're allowed to be annoyed. You're allowed to be disappointed. You're allowed to vocalize that. That's all fine. Nobody is saying you can't. We're just kind of in disbelief at the what you've deemed as righteous anger over artwork that no one's forcing you. Nobody's like, you have to spend your hard-earned money. You have to spend it on this, whether you like it or not. Also, you can hire, this is what is bizarre to me. There are so many people nowadays on Etsy who you can pay to have artwork done for your books exactly how you want it. You can pay artists to do prints that you like. You do not have to go through companies if you don't want to. Because this is another thing.
You can even pay them for edges, right? You can have custom edges.
That's what I'm talking about. Yeah, you can have them do custom sprayed edges for you. There's tons of companies that do that now. So go do that. Why are you, unless you don't want to, but getting to the price now, this I think is another thing to point out if you're just like, oh, that's a lot, is it was, I think, $200 for the first 4 books, right?
Yeah.
Which I'm thinking about it. I'm like, man, a brand new hardback these days is like $32. So this is obviously about $50 per book, but that's with the artwork on the edges. This is with the artwork on the inside of the book. So I'm like, you can debate whether you think $50 is worth it. It's $50 before shipping. So I think that definitely plays a role. But I'm also just like, you don't have to buy it then. They have to pay people. Like, they have to pay their artists. They have to pay their staff. They have a lot of people they work for. And I'm not saying they're like, I'm not ride or die FairyLoot or nothing, but they do have other people they have to pay for. So
Well, I think people's argument with the price was that they've released similar 4-book sets that were less expensive, that they felt like had more customizations. Because the under dust jacket customizations are kind of basic with some foiling, which looks fine. Like, I'm not mad at the foiling, but it's not necessarily like they're like top tier, fully extra artwork on the naked hardback and artwork on, like, they could have like gone all the way. So I understand, like, maybe having a little bit like, okay, well, you released this other set that was 4 books that was like 150. Why is this one 200? Just because the fandom will do it. So I understand a little bit of like the corporateness in it, but
I do
you don't
wonder.
have to buy it.
I think some pricing. I totally agree with everything you just said, and I think it's
her licensing
also
is also probably really expensive.
Yes, that's what I was going to get at. So I think it's completely legitimate. I think this is the most understandable frustration that has been expressed, is the price. And again, we can debate whether we think $50 per book is worth it or not. But if you don't think it's worth it, and you feel like,
especially for YA books, because YA books are printed cheaper, right? So it's probably like double the cost of a standard YA hardback.
Right. The reason it would seem a lot of times, because people wonder all the time, like, why don't we have more special editions for these really popular series? And I think it's what you were just pointing out, is that I don't know how often they're allowed to sell it below a certain price point. They probably have to sell it for a certain amount, because there's a lot of things that go behind the scenes, because people were really upset when FairyLoot put out their 4th Wing edition, because they were mad that they didn't have more stock, which I can get if you've been doing a whole series and then randomly the 3rd book you have way less stock than the other ones or something. They did that, I think, with Oathbringer. But with 4th Wing, they had no idea. They had planned way in advance, this particular book we're going to have a special edition for. They got the stock they got. I think they worked with the publisher with the amount that they were going to have. And then it sold out immediately, because by the time they announced it, the book was out. Or I think it was about to be out or something. It was really popular at that point. And then people got really mad at them for not having more stock. And that is lightning in a bottle. That's one of those, there's no way to predict that book was going to blow up the way it did. And it's not like they can just on demand. That's the thing. These books aren't print on demand. If they were, they wouldn't be special editions. So you kind of have to, I feel like, keep in mind some of these additional details that go into the production of these special editions. But it's very much like a mine mindset. Like, I want things to look the way I want them to look. I want the price that I want to pay, and I want things to go exactly the way I want. Doesn't mean you can't criticize the company, but some of these things, I think there's additional elements that are not being considered at times.
Well, plus I'm sure the publisher has dictations on like what customizations are even allowed. Maybe they weren't even given the option of doing a printed hardback. Maybe the only option was foiling. Like, who knows? Like, a lot of that's not necessarily within FairyLoot's controls. They're probably just told what things are they allowed to mess with, and then they do whatever they want from there.
Yeah. Before we move on to the character art portion of this conversation, which is, if I seem a little unfair, or if I think any of us seem a little particularly annoyed, I feel like it comes down to this element, because this was unacceptable on all levels. There was no excuse for what happened with this. But before we do that, really quick, back to the discussion we were having about the similarities of just depicting this particular area in Throne of Glass, and how inevitably there was going to be some similarities. I wanted to show other pieces that people have done. So this is something that's being sold on, I think, Etsy. So you can see, this looks kind of, the colors and the the use of like the orange flowers and stuff like that. This looks kind of like the Acrylopix one. You don't have the stag front and center, but I do feel like color choice and everything of this area is somewhat similar. And then there was another one that I wanted to share. Let's find that one really quick. Let's see. This one, which also has, this one has the stag.
And it's brown.
Mounds in the back.
He's brown.
It's brown. And this is a print someone was selling. It's obviously Throne of Glass themed. It has, you know, the to whatever end quote in there. It's labeled as Terracin. And I would hope people haven't gone and just harassed and like negatively commented on this person's, their little like almost postcard looking print that you can get. It almost looks like a wedding invitation.
It totally does.
But I think when people were questioning if FairyLoot had maybe seen Acrylopix and then decided to do their own thing and tell the artists and all this stuff, I want to give benefit of the doubt that people were thinking like, I don't like the idea of this smaller company having their art taken by a bigger company. So I want to believe that some people had the right intention by speaking up about it. I do want to say, I don't think from anything I saw that Acrylopix ever accused FairyLoot. I don't think they ever entered the conversation. So people were kind of writing at dawn for Acrylopix without Acrylopix ever saying anything.
Acrylopix is probably laughing all the way to the bank now that all these other people have been notified.
I know.
Or they're like, oh, geez, I'm going to have so many orders to fulfill. I hope Acrylopix has gotten a lot of business out of this and it's gone smoothly and everybody's been nice. And Acrylopix, I think, also has, I love that companies are starting to do this, those sort of almost transparent pieces of paper that have artwork on them that you can put in the page so then it creates artwork like on the page.
Overlays.
The overlays, thank you. Yeah, those I think are really pretty and they have some pretty cool ones. And I think they made custom dust jackets for anybody that's interested. But anyway, I wanted to show those other examples of Terracin because I think the second one I showed looked kind of like the FairyLoot version. And then the other one I showed, the first one looked like the Acrylopix version with the colors and stuff. So I think it's just,
it's coincidence difficult that they chose the same scene. And like, sure, you can make the argument that maybe they should have looked into the other edition and maybe chosen not to do the same scene. I could see there being an argument for that. But at the end of the day, it's the same scene. I don't know what to tell you.
And we don't know how long.
Didn't come up with that scene.
We don't know how long they were in the process. It's possible, which I don't think this is the case. It's possible that FairyLoot's art was done first, but they didn't make their announcement until after Acrylopix had released theirs, which Acrylopix released theirs quite a while ago. So that's probably not the situation. It's probably not the situation, but I think we don't often know how long these things are in the works for. So it's kind of like when two books come out around the same time. Like I think this happened, speaking of Sarah J. Maas, an Enchantment of Ravens, when it came out, everybody's like, you copied Sarah J. Maas, you copied ACOTAR. And I'm like, I really don't think with the way that publishing works and how long it takes to write books, I really don't think Margaret Rogerson copied the character.
Wrote a book in like 2 months or something to pop it out.
Yeah, I'm sure that's not, I get that there's definitely similarities for sure, but I really don't think that she just directly copied. And also there's trends. When something becomes a trend, when the trend first starts, it looks like copying. And then once it's officially labeled a trend, it's just like, oh, this is a trend, like vampires or something. But if there's only 2 books out around the same time that have vampires, then, you know, people are kind of like, wait a sec. Anyway, so then getting now to the character art, the absolutes, there is no justification. I don't care if you're upset. You clearly get upset about stupid things anyway, portion of this whole situation. So there is character art. First, I want to say this artist is great. Their artwork is cool. And they are one of the first artists that were making book art, just making book art for people to enjoy. They were one of the first ones, and they've been doing it for years. They've probably been making art for longer than a lot of people have even been fans, specifically making art for this series too, because they've made a lot of art over the years for Sarah J. Maas's works. So if you harass this person, if you started going off to how you don't like the artwork, I don't know. Did your parents fail to teach you manners? I don't understand. I don't get it. It really, this whole part of it, I'm like, anybody that did this, I have not polite things in my head about you. I don't understand. So if anybody doesn't know, which we've already touched on this, but there is separate from the conversation about book accurate art, the similarities, there is artwork that is for the characters that is going to be, I think, on the end pages when you open the book up. There's character art, and people were just trashing it. Not everybody.
It was the end. It's the end papers, and they're doing reverse dust jacket.
Okay. And this person has worked with FairyLoot before. Both these artists have worked with FairyLoot before. They've also, the other artists that made the covers, they have worked on things outside of FairyLoot. They're like an established artist that has worked in this industry for a while. But anyway, so this particular artist that was doing the character art, people just decided to be mean. That's really all it came down to. They decided to be mean. They felt entitled to voice their unkind thoughts because it didn't look the way they wanted it to look. And I get it. There have been times where there's a cover for a special edition or a reprint or something, and I'm like, oh, I don't really like that art style. I don't think there's anything wrong if it's, you know, like the Shades of Magic. They got a reprint. I think that was the publishing company trying to then tie it in with Threads of Power and all that. And I'm like, oh, I like the originals. This isn't really my style. And I feel like this is just trying to pull in money and things like that. But don't start saying mean things on a post that the artist.
But did you go and find the cover artist and tag them, Elle? When you're like, this
and
new cover for Shades of Magic.
What did you say, Ingrid?
I said, this is horrible and I hate it, and you destroyed my life because you made these covers.
Yeah.
Your art is ugly.
This artist, though, like, it was so sad to see the way that people were treating them. It was awful. I don't understand. And also, I'm like, you realize that's not part of the process, right? Like, books typically don't come with artwork. And if somebody makes art for it, then you can think to yourself like, oh, I don't really like that art, or oh, that's not really how I picture those characters. Why would you go tell the artist that? That doesn't make any sense. Or why would you comment on a post they're tagged in that doesn't, which is essentially the same thing? It doesn't make any sense. You just don't, you're inconsiderate. That's the nicest way to put it.
Yeah.
You're inconsiderate. But anyway, Roger and Ingrid, what were your thoughts on that part of this whole thing?
I think I keep going back to the thought of that half of the people that commented mean things to this artist wouldn't be able to take a fraction of the criticism she took for this whole thing. Not even a fraction. Because the problem is they feel that they are immune, that they can just go into an Instagram post and comment horrible things because nothing is going to happen to them, which it isn't. But they also don't see the person behind, because I guarantee you, maybe some would, but I don't think people would go up to that person in person and say, your art is horrible. Like, I don't like the way this looks. They wouldn't, because you don't have, I'm not going to say terrible things, but you don't have the gall to go up to someone's face and say that. You only say it because it's online.
Right.
But there is a person there, and obviously the artist was super affected. She made a whole post about how she's never going to, you know, I don't know if you're going to get to this, but made a post saying she's never going to produce Sarah J. Maas art again because people attacked her in such a way that she's like rethinking her whole art style, which is insane. Like, I don't think she needs to rethink the way that she does art, because I liked them. I didn't think there was anything wrong with them. I don't know. I was like appalled by all the horrible messages.
Both artists, because the first one we were discussing ended up editing the post to say, I'm standing with them. I'm also, unless it's, I think, something that is already in the works, they're not going to share any Sarah J. Maas art again. And I also will say, I feel really bad for the members of the fandom who are nice, who aren't involved in any of this, or maybe who were, but did voice politely like, oh, I don't know if you're, open to this or if it's possible, but I think, the stag's supposed to be white. If you can't, if they were really nice, I feel so bad for those individuals. And I feel bad too because FairyLoot is now going to try to redo some things because they did have a post. One, they had a post defending their artists, which I'm like, good, thank you. And second, they also had a post like sharing their artists' art over the years from these two, which I was like, thank you. And then there were people commenting, they're like, we never were mean. And I'm like, okay, stop it. Some
They were
people
like,
were.
nice try, FairyLoot. I was like, oh my God.
Yeah. Well, I think because a lot of people pointed out that they were being really mean, and then so they're like, "Oh, we're not being mean." So then people get defensive, like, you know.
Well, I think another side to it is just the hypocrisy in the bookish community, because if like people will go to bat all the time being like, don't tag authors in reviews, don't bring authors into these spaces, but like these artists were tagged and there's no way they're not going to know. So I'm just like, you wouldn't tag authors in negative reviews, or you shouldn't, and I think it's pretty generally accepted in the bookish community that that would be very rude to do. So now you're doing the same thing to an artist. Like, why is it any different? Books are art. This is a different style of art. Like, it's just wild to me that people have this dissociation because they feel that they were disappointed and they don't know how to handle their disappointment like an adult, where you just send it to your group chat, or you're just like, oh, that sucks, like I really didn't want it to look like whatever, but like you just move on. Like, it's not the end of the world. You're not starving. You're not all of a sudden losing your house and getting evicted because the stag is brown, or the character art looks slightly different, or you liked different versions. Because I know that the artist who does the character art, she's even talked about before how each time she gets commissioned, she intentionally tries to make them look different because she's tired of drawing the same characters and doesn't want to do it the same way. So she'll have them have different hair or do the tattoos and different, like she'll intentionally do it because she's a human being and not a robot that doesn't want to draw Rhysand completely book accurate for the 50 millionth time.
Yeah.
It's just, it goes back to what Elle said. People are just so entitled. Like, they feel that they are entitled to have what
And they don't know how to handle their
the way they
disappointment.
want.
It's okay to be disappointed and be like, this isn't what I had hoped it would be, or this isn't all the specializations that I've come to expect from FairyLoot. I wish they had done whatever. Or even if you want to do like a story post about it, and even if you wanted to tag FairyLoot themselves and be like, hey, I wish that this had been, whatever you want. Like, it's a company, they're big people, whatever. But to attack an individual for their creative expression is wild.
Creative expression they were commissioned to do, which is not like I would be okay with it if it weren't commissioned work, but it's like their artistic freedom is limited to the view that they have, that the company has, that they have been hired by. So like if I, because I have worked with artists, if I commission artists and I tell them like I'm looking for this, and this, and then they post it, because sometimes artists will share posts they've been commissioned for. If they share it and somebody starts going off about like, well, but it should have had this, it should have had this, and it's like, okay, but like this is what the author wanted, or this is what the company wanted, so take it to them. I know it's kind of hitting that same point, but I think, Roger, what you were talking about, so internet etiquette, specifically like bookish internet etiquette, is something that feels like is missing a little bit, or that people are just not aware. So in my head, even if the artists hadn't been tagged, I feel like the artists are hopefully like excited, and that they're like, oh my gosh, people have been waiting. I can't wait to see if they like it, you know? And if they see it and they're like, oh, people don't like it, then they can hop off and like stop looking at it. But even then, I probably wouldn't post, I probably wouldn't comment on something I was pretty sure the artist is likely to see. I think, to your point, if you want to talk about it on your channel, if you want to talk about it on your Instagram stories, if you want to say like, hey, in your Discord or something, I get it. And I don't think people, there's this idea, because some people were like, we're allowed to express our thoughts and we're allowed to express our disappointment. And it's like, that's not the point that anybody, or I shouldn't say nobody's trying to make that point. Some people certainly might be like, you can't, which isn't true. But it's just, to what you were saying, Ingrid, about you wouldn't go up to that person and say those things. And most of these people wouldn't be able to handle something that really bothers me. And this is the word you were using before, is that people will say, like, it's just criticism. Learn to accept criticism. And I'm like, you don't know what criticism is. Like, actual genuine criticism. So in the process, oftentimes with artists who have been commissioned, there will be part of their process where they will send an update to the company or the author, whoever's hired them, and they'll say, how is it looking so far? Do you want me to make any changes? How is this part of it? How's this? And then they move on to the next part. So they're getting criticisms along the way. And then if once the art is out, you don't like it, then that's why you need to go to the company, not the artist in this situation. If it's just the artist is just posting their art, I also kind of don't get this idea of like, I'm allowed to criticize when most people don't have any idea how to draw or paint or do anything. So first off, I'm like, where do you get the audacity to think that you have the right to criticize? All it comes down to is like, I don't like this is really what it usually is.
Yeah,
and
well,
if you are
criticism should be actionable. It's not just like, this is ugly. Criticism is like, oh, like, I don't love the muted color palette or something. Like, those are criticisms, but you being like, your whole art is ugly, their faces are stupid, like, that's not criticism, that's just mean.
Yeah, I think it's fair to say, because sometimes artists will post a lot of really similar looking pieces, and I think it's fair to be like, oh, I'm just curious, here's a thing I've seen, because I follow a lot of artists, and there is a conversation that people have about what the algorithm seems to like is pretty girl faces. So a lot of artists will start to post just pretty girl faces in their artwork all the time, even when they can do other things. So sometimes people will say like, oh, just do you sometimes draw other stuff? I would love to see your style with other things. Like that's a criticism essentially voiced politely, which is basically, do you do anything besides pretty hot girls, you know? And I think there's been conversations in the past about artists who their style is so similar from book to book that people are like, is there a way that you can make the characters look a little different from this book to this book, or you use a lot of the same colors? You know, that is maybe criticisms, but even then I'm like, if the publishing company is hiring that artist over and over again, they know they look similar and they don't care. So, and you're not the person hiring them. So I don't know. I think
that
you're allowed
can also be seen as like, that's their style of art, right?
Yeah.
Like there's like recognizable patterns in the way that they draw or whatever, or colors and things. And maybe that's why they keep getting hired. They like their style.
And I think it is interesting because Roger, you were talking about the difference between how we treat authors in the book community versus artists. And I think that, Ingrid, you brought up something really good with it being their distinct style. I think that oftentimes we like authors who have a distinct voice, and that's something we applaud. Like, oh, I always can tell it's written by so-and-so, which you can also say, I don't like it because they never vary it up. It's always the same. It's a double-edged sword. But with artwork, it's like a lot of times the conversation is only negative. It's not, I love their style. I always love their style. I'll always buy a book that's, you know, the artwork is done by them or whatever. It always seems to be like all their stuff looks the same. All their stuff looks the same. And is it that it looks the same, or is it that they have a distinct style? Because there is a difference between things all looking the same and the artist having a style. And it's same with the author portion of this. Are all the story beats the same? The characters are the same, but with different names? Or is it that they have a distinct voice and there are differences that can be made for both of them? So Ingrid, there was something that you were starting to mention that you said, I don't know if you were going to bring this up. It was the response on the artist's end to all this, I believe. Were either of you wanting to talk about that too much? I just feel like they've already had to deal with so much. I just feel so bad for them. I feel like part of this video is just basically saying, hey, leave them alone.
Yeah.
I mean, I wish that the company had responded sooner, because FAIRYLOOT waited several days and like 5,000 to 10,000 nasty comments before they finally did anything. So I wish that they had turned around and defended their artists faster, or turned off comments, or whatever, did whatever they needed to do to stop the artists from getting continued harassment. I feel like they kind of, and I understand that they're a company, so they have to do what they have to do, but also like you can still have integrity as a company and like stand up for people.
Yeah.
Because it almost felt like a formality after the fact. It was like 2 days later. It was like it had already happened. And then finally they were like, okay, well, we stick by our artists. I'm like, okay, well, cool. Where was that when they were getting 5K comments on the first day?
And also,
I don't think they even
Sarah J. Maas too, right?
That was one thing I was wondering if we wanted to bring up. So this will kind of be maybe our last talking point, which is Sarah J. Maas's involvement or lack thereof of involvement. So this is almost like a portion of the should artists get involved, or authors in online discourse involving their works. And in this instance, I think it's a little different because it's not like they're being upset at somebody for leaving a negative review of their book or something. This is not quite the same thing. So I was curious what your thoughts were, if you think that Sarah J. Maas should get involved. Do you think it would help if she got involved? Do you think it would make everything messier and worse? What are your thoughts on that? Ingrid, what do you think?
I think she definitely should have made a statement, at least saying we approved of this art, like we liked it, we approved of it, and that she didn't have to say anything else, but basically, tell her public or her fans or whatever that it was in fact approved by her team, and that would have given a little bit more of like a protection to the artist, right? Because they're getting attacked, and it's almost like Sarah J. Maas just doesn't say anything either way, so she is kind of
Ever.
like this ever, right? Like she doesn't make, I don't know. I think we talked about this. I think it's a business decision, honestly, because I feel like she doesn't want to like side with anyone so that she doesn't lose the other half of her audience, right? Because I think once she does go in and make comments, I think people will either way like say something to her or against her or whatever. But in this instance, I think it was ethically the right thing to do, to say, hey, like you guys need to stop attacking these artists. Like we approved of this art and we in fact love it, right? Because they approved of it, which I'm sure lots of people loved it too, but it seems like the majority of the comments were that people are hating it. And I just think that she should have said something about it. I don't know.
I don't by any means disagree with anything you just said, because I agree. I think if she had simply said our team, she doesn't even have to say it. Somebody on her team can make a post and put it on her Instagram that says the like SJM team approved of the, the only thing that I maybe to have to add to what you said as far as the business decision portion, I think it's a business decision for her to, if I had to guess, not know what's going on at all about any of this. I don't even know if she's aware that FAIRYLOOT is doing special editions, because I kind of was like, when you were asking in our private chat, like, do any of you know if she said anything, or do you think she should have said anything? I went to her Instagram page and I was like, oh, I think she's too busy being on the Kelly Clarkson show. I think she couldn't care less if she even knows this exists. I think it's possible her team runs everything on her behalf. She just writes the books, and she's big enough that she has employees that handle everything else, or her publisher handles everything else. I don't think she's even seen them. That would be my guess. I don't even think she's seen them. I don't think she's caught wind of any of this happening. And I don't think she cares at the end of the day. Right. I think she is, I don't mean this in like a status way. I just mean, I think she's so above, meaning she's very successful and very rich, that this is almost like not her problem, even though it's her books, which that could launch into a whole other conversation, because I think it'd be one thing if the publisher did this, because then she doesn't really have a say. A lot of times artists and authors and all these people, it comes down to the publisher, the people that are representing them, as opposed to them, because even titles and things like that, most of the time the authors don't get to decide on those sorts of things. They don't get to decide on the cover art. But to give an example of somebody who maybe does have a little more say, since I was talking about Cosmere earlier, Dragonsteel, which would be Sanderson's team, if they're creating a special edition of, and that's him creating a special edition, not an outside company, but if they're creating a special edition, I'm almost positive he's involved. I don't think Sarah J. Maas is involved, even a little bit. That's my guess. Now, whether she should
it just goes to show that she, like, it just doesn't care, right? Like, she's made the books.
Her fans care way more than she does.
Yes. Yeah, for sure.
Roger, what do you think? Do you think she should have said something? Do you think she knows about any of it?
I mean, I feel like when you're a certain level of author, like a Maas or a Sanderson, that there is some kind of responsibility on you to not let your fandom be rabid on people, because like the only person who can kind of diffuse these situations is this author that people think that they're like white knighting for. So if the author was very clear and said, hey, I love this artwork, like whatever, then I think it would have helped diffuse the situation. But I know that there's a lot of argument about not authors not being in reviewer space, whatever. But like, I feel like a certain level of artist needs to have some kind of pulse on their fandom or somebody on their team that's helping, because at the end of the day, it just makes her look bad, because it's like, well, your fans run amok and you just don't care. That's not a good look for anybody.
And I think this is why there's certain fandoms that get to be known for being hostile, and they are very unwelcoming. They do not listen to or hear anything. Speaking of criticism, they won't hear it. You can only say good things about the work, whatever the case may be. And there are other fandoms that are known for being very different. And I think the Sarah J. Maas fandom, for a lot of people, they have had negative experiences, whether they're fans or not, whether they agree. There might be people that are like, I wish that it was more book accurate. I wish that the price was cheaper. I was side-eyeing the similarities, and they didn't go and do all of this stuff. So it's like they might still, they might still see some of the stuff, but they're not launching into these attacks or and again, there is a difference between the people that voice things politely and then the ones that were just cruel. There's a difference, and people should be able to know the difference. The ones that were cruel seem to not realize they were the ones that were cruel, and you're like, yeah, you were.
We weren't.
I don't know why.
What are you talking about? Okay.
I know.
Sure.
I saw
Would you like
one
5,000
those
people
comments,
to come
and I'm
comment
like,
and say that your clothing is ugly? Like, I feel like you'd feel some type of way if you had that many people. Like, come on.
Yeah, it was just not a good look.
Where did the
all
golden
around.
rule go? Treat people the way you want to be treated. I'm pretty sure none of those
It
people
doesn't
would have
exist on
been
the internet.
thrilled.
What are you talking about, Roger?
I'm too old. These kids.
That is one argument I see about artists all the time that I'm like, get it out. People will be like, well, if you're putting it online, you're subjecting yourself to criticism. You have to know that. And I'm just like, I don't understand. I understand, like, if let's say one of the two of you were coming up to me and you're like, it's just so unfair that I got a mean comment. I'd be like, I get it. That person that left that mean comment is stupid. It is part of the territory, just so you know, like, it's probably going to continue. I might say that just letting you know if you were new or something. But this idea that that is natural, that's just the way of things, and you need to accept people being horrible as just a byproduct of you sharing for just like the love, usually, because again, the person that did the character art has been sharing artwork for years for free. They're just sharing it for the love of the fandom and the art, like these characters and these works. And you have decided, like, they put it online, therefore I get to tell them exactly what I think. I don't have to filter myself. I'm just like, that's, to come back to the word that I feel like sums it all up, entitlement.
For sure.
Anyway, were there any final thoughts or things that we didn't mention before we wrap it up? If any of them find this video, I'm just like, oh, well, I couldn't care less. I don't care.
More money for
Thanks
charity.
for the engagement for charity.
Yep. Yeah, thank you. We appreciate it. I'll be sure to put your negativity toward a good cause. That's the thing. I debated whether I wanted to say anything. One, I really wanted to say, leave these authors, or not authors, excuse me, leave the artists alone. That was a big thing, is I'm like, I want to say something because it's stupid and it's unacceptable. Oh my gosh, that was so loud. I think it was your clicking, whatever that was just now, Roger.
Oh, yeah.
It was loud in my headphone. Doesn't matter. Anyway, but I debated whether or not to do any kind of discussion like this, or if I should say anything on my channel, because I'm like, I don't want to add to the negativity. But I'm like, there was just so much negativity that I just wanted something to balance out against it, I guess. Because I'm like, I know we're not the only ones looking at the situation thinking, how has it come to this, that these artists are being treated this way? So yeah, I don't know. I just mostly wanted to stick up for them. And then when I really thought about it, I'm like, these people are mad over something so inconsequential that at the end of the day, I'm like, how are you this upset about something no one is forcing you to buy. It doesn't make any sense. Anyway, so yeah, I'm kind of just repeating myself and yelling. But care about more important things.
Or just
That's
wait
what-
longer. It's not like this is going to be the last edition of Throne of Glass ever made. It's like,
Seriously.
come on. They just got
How many
recovered.
special editions of Sarah J. Maas do we have already? Like, you'll get another one. Don't worry.
Or just go pay. Like I said, go pay to have someone do it for you. It's not
True.
an impossible thing to do these days. You can get it exactly the way you want. And if you didn't know that, now you know. You can stop being upset. Anyway. Okay. I gave my final thoughts. Do either of you have anything to say or add? Not really.
Be kind, people. Be kind to other people on the internet. Just because they put their faces on the internet does not mean they're there for harassment. And it was harassment. I'll leave it at that.
And maybe double check if people are tagged on things before you decide that you need to comment. Maybe that will give you that extra moment to be like, I don't actually need to say this in a public forum. Take the moment.
And double check if someone's already expressed what you said. If a number of people have already pointed out, hey, the stag should be white, you probably don't need to then add.
Just like it. Just heart it. They'll see the number
Yes.
that there's 15,000 likes on it. Fine.
Yep.
I mean, they're more likely to be able to see that than making another comment, right? Because I feel like even for like creators, sometimes you'll see the top liked comment first. So that's a better way to have your voice be heard. There you go. You're welcome.
And then on that note, thanks to anybody who watches this. I probably did get a little saltier than was necessary. So I do apologize on that. But only to the people who got roped in based off of language used that was, combining everybody into one camp. Because I know it's not everybody in one camp. We're specifically talking about the harassment, like Ingrid was saying. So
the entitlement.
Leave artists alone. Yeah, leave artists alone. Check your entitlement, please. And that's that. I hope you get the edition of your dreams someday.
Or just pay for it.
There you go. Or just pay.
Yes.
Yeah. Here's the last thing I'll say. People that like to resell things for really high prices, this is like perfect for them. They're like, oh, good. Nobody wants it. I'll buy it. And then they're going to buy it and they're going to stock up and they're going to resell it. And also all the people that are mad, I'm like, some of you are going to buy it anyway. Some of them are going to buy it regardless. So they just wanted to be part of the I saw one person that's like, well, lots of people agree with me. And I'm like, not a good argument. Dictators throughout history, pretty sure they thought that too, but that doesn't make what they did okay. Sorry. Some people have stupid thoughts. A lot of people have stupid thoughts. It's not a good argument. Anyway.
It's called intrusive thoughts and you keep them to yourself.
Or you save it for the group chat. Yeah. Save it for the group chat. Okay, thanks everybody. We didn't save it for the group chat. We brought it to the internet. It was fun. Thanks everybody. Yes. We'll see you later. Thanks Ingrid and Roger. Bye.
Thank you.